Hello, we will get started shortly with Genealogy Quick Start live on YouTube and Facebook. Just give us 1 second. We'll get started shortly. Thank you so much for joining. Genealogy Quick Start live on YouTube. Thank you, thank you. See you coming in. Make sure that you know that this is an interactive show. So we look forward to your questions and comments. Please announce where you are. Let us know where you're joining from. And we're going to get started shortly. And have everyone here. I see Diane in the auto shot. All right. Looks like we are live on, actually really live on Facebook and on YouTube. Hello, hello. Welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. My name is Shamele Jordon, and I'm the producer and host, and I am so excited to have you with us here today. A great DNA show, doubleheader DNA show, fantastic guests, a surprise. It was going to be a surprise guest, but I kind of let everyone know today we have an extra guest on. But today our special guest is Diahan Southard, and she is your DNA guide. And today she's going to teach us something that is near and dear to my heart because I have a hole in my tree. Do you guys have a hole in your tree? I have a hole in my tree where my great-grandfather is missing. And so Diane is here. She's going to be the guide, and she's going to teach us all on how to find missing great-grandparents with DNA. But first, before we start with that, we're going to have our regulars, Jim and Michael. No, I still have not been able to get rid of them. They showed up again this week. So they're going to talk to us about how to prepare for your DNA test results, because we're going to find out from Jim and Michael, as well as with our extra, as a special guest, surprise guest interview, that it's very important to prepare. It's not just about spitting and then, waiting. There's some things that you can do to make your results, your experience that much better. So let's go ahead and get started with Genealogy Quick Start. I'll bring my buddies on, Jim and Michael. How are you guys doing?
Real Perfect.
Well. I'm glad you guys are perfect. We have at least 31 people on here now. And so we have Kathy from Northwest Ohio. We have Pam's here. Another Ohio. What's going on with Ohio? Lots of Ohio. We have C. Davis is here from Detroit, Michigan. So are we just Midwest today? Let's see. No, we also have Susan from Santa Fe and my buddy from Warminster. Hey, Diane. That's my road buddy right there. And then we also have Kathy Wiseman. Hello, Kathy. Welcome, everyone, to Genealogy Quick Start. So, Jim and Michael, how have you guys been?
Hanging in there.
Pretty good. Not as tired as the cat, but pretty good. So, yeah.
So I want to go ahead and get started because everyone needs to know how to prepare for DNA test. So let's go ahead and get started with preparing for your DNA results. And while we're doing that, don't forget, as you join, we want to know where you are. We love to know where you are. There's been some interesting shares outside of the US, so we definitely want to know where you are. So Michael and Jim, let's go ahead with step one, which is basically with anything that we do in genealogy, right? This is the first step, right? Determine the research goal.
Yes, a life lived aimlessly is a life not fully maximized. And we're talking about things you can do before you test, and that's our focus in this first session. But some of these are things, if you've been confused about your results or feel like you're kind of going in circles, just step back and do some of these things too. If you're having difficulty, it never hurts to kind of go back and not totally reinvent the wheel, but kind of reevaluate.
Well,
Exactly.
genealogy is always a matter of creating a hypothesis, trying to prove or disprove it. And if you disprove it, then you got to go back and get another hypothesis.
That nice little circle. I love it. So let's go ahead. We said we have to determine the research goal. So in general, are Michael's lips moving? And we
I'm not
can't hear
talking.
him.
I'm talking now. I was not talking
Okay.
before.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
So in general, when you think about goals, I have like ethnicity, I have parentage, people. That's to me when they came up with DNA testing, I thought this was fantastic for people whose parentage have been kept from them. And then missing ancestors. So let's move on to step 2. Step 2, first you have to have a goal. A lot of people start with ethnicity. So I want to get on my high horse for ethnicity. That's a small part, and that's like low-hanging fruit. It's kind of like when you start yoga. Like if anybody does yoga, you go in because you want to stretch your muscles or you had an injury. And if you're lucky, something catches hold of you and yoga becomes more than just stretching your body. So hopefully those people who are taking this just for ethnicity, that is not the main reason to do this. You want to get more out of it, right?
And in some cases, those ethnicity estimates are estimates, the key word being estimate. And so you always want to keep that in mind, when you're looking at those. And you want to look at the other, the parentage, certain ancestors or whatever, kind of as once you get, like you say, once you're done stretching or whatever your initial interest is in it, and you move to some of those other goals, they're a little more manageable, a little more realistic. And the other thing is they're fun to get you hooked, but then you kind of got to go from there.
Yeah,
With what you're trying to use your test for.
Ethnicity is the fishing reel, getting more people into the pile of testing. But
and I'm thankful for that. I'm so thankful that it's
Yeah.
not a genealogist only tool, because those folks are actually helping us out. So all you genealogists who get mad at people who don't have trees, their spit's helping us out. So let's move to step 2, which is to check your tree for accuracy. So, checking your tree for accuracy is quite an important step. And so you guys kind of parsed it out, like, it's obvious, but talk to us more about what were the details here.
Well, you've got to remember, first and foremost, DNA is about biological relationships. You may have step relatives or, step parents and step grandparents that you thought a lot of that were very influential in your life. And we all understand that and appreciate that. But when you spit in that tube, wrong way. When you spit in that tube, it's about your biological relatives. And so you want to look in your tree and see, is there a chance? And sometimes that's why you take the test, just to try to prove those things or disprove those things. But if you can, you want to take a look and see, are there any weak links? Was that person really the biological father? Were they a stepfather? And things of that type, because that could be why your results look really weird, is because the man you thought was grandpa wasn't grandpa. So sometimes you can quickly look at marriage dates and birth dates and enumerations in a census another time and maybe kind of get a thought that, maybe that guy really wasn't the bio dad or the bio mom or whatever, and then kind of go from there. But you want to keep yourself open to those possibilities, because that's the main reason why your results might look really strange, is there may be a biological person that you think is the biological connection, but is not.
And especially then when you reach out to even slightly more distant relatives who you presumably don't know as well, cousins, and the difference between somebody who is a full first cousin and a half first cousin, that's going to affect the amount of DNA you share profoundly. And so you, as Michael is saying, you may misattribute the relationship if you're going by what you think the paper says, the paper documents, rather than really sussing it out. And okay, how many marriages were there in that family, or how many relationships were there in that family?
So you want to ask questions about some of the dirt. If you don't know some dirt, you find that person, and sometimes it's the person that's not related to you that's more open to telling, whose baby isn't really their baby.
But keep in mind, the person who's not related to you is not going to be in your DNA results. But you're right. You want to reach out to those step relatives and things of that type that might know more information. In some cases, they're more willing to tell. I had a great-great-grandfather who was somewhat colorful, shall we say, and the person that gave the most dirt on him descended from the second wife, not the first wife.
Yes, exactly.
And it was a whole different perspective.
The person who has less, involvement as far as they're further apart. You guys have an example here. This is an ad. Talk to me about this.
Well, I wanted an example where everybody was dead because I didn't want to broadcast anybody's issues. But this is an estate settlement from the 1950s. And basically, the essence of this is they're not all full relatives of this lady who has died. She had two half sisters and three half siblings. And the estate, all these records, they make no distinction about that. And if they were a little more closely related to me, whether somebody's a half second cousin or a full second cousin, it's going to make the DNA, shared DNA, look a little bit different. And so if you think they're full, but they're not, those shared amounts might look a little different. So you just want to be aware of that, that even, and when I'm trying to forget, I remember what's in the other slides, but you want to keep things in chronological order when you find certain records. Sometimes that will help you distinguish whether there was a second marriage or a third marriage, and maybe somebody really wasn't a biological relative at all, but some certain right now an estate record will not do that, but obituaries and other items may suggest they're biological when they're not.
So interesting. You said obituaries. Talk to us about those obituaries.
I'll let Jim address the obituaries.
Yeah, well,
the newspaper guy.
Yeah, well, especially the last 20 years or so, as just about all newspapers have moved to paid obituaries. It basically gets in the newspaper exactly how the family writes it. Back when I was a newspaper man, when they were doing, stone tablets and all that, we had a very specific newspaper style, and it was very difficult to deviate from that. Now it's pretty much, you decide what you want to put in and how you want to say it. That's what's going to become the actual obituary.
Like that. So I think, did you have, I think someone else had, let's see. Yes, you have Mildred Beidler.
My own mother, and this is an example. Even though I'm an ex-newspaper man and a genealogist, both crafts where you're trying to the hallmarks are accuracy over all else. Out of sentiment, I did add a person who is not a blood relative to my mother. One of these nieces is not a niece. She's actually my first cousin once removed on my father's side, not on my mother's side. But she treated my mother like an aunt and vice versa, and was very nice to her. She sang at her funeral. So Yeah, I fudged the truth a little bit because the obituary
Shame.
is a reflection of family history, not pure genealogy.
Right.
The other thing to remember, and the thing about the obituaries and newspapers and why we're kind of mentioning those, they're records that a lot of us use when we're trying to prove how a DNA match is related for late 20th century research. We're reliant upon those. And sort of as Jim alluded to, sometimes to keep peace with the people who are not dead because of the obituary, you may have things in there that aren't biologically accurate, but for one reason or another, because you don't want to fight at the funeral or what have you, and we're laughing, but these things happen.
Yeah.
And when there are immediate family, we know what the reality is and what the obituary says. But if this is a fourth cousin from Albuquerque that we've never met before, all we have is what's in that obituary. And you
Exactly.
just want to always in the back of your head with these things, could there be something in there that was in there to keep peace? A newspaper person like Jim would never make an error, but in theory that could happen. But those are things to keep in the back of your mind.
All right, let's move to step 3, which is so when we talked about checking your tree for accuracy. I just want to back up a second. No, I'm not going to back up. I'm going to move forward. Link your tree to your DNA test. So what do you mean when you say that?
Well, whoever you have tested, what tested with, be it Ancestry or MyHeritage, or what have you, for those services that have both family trees and DNA, you want to have a family tree on there so that you can get matches once your test comes back, matches with other people who have tested in that circle. And some will be known matches, hopefully, and others, who knows. But if you both have public trees, you can compare and see how you're related.
If the Ancestry uses what's called through lines, and it's got its issues, and we could do a whole session on through lines, which we're not. But when you link the tree to that specific test result, it helps you to analyze your results. It helps somebody else who happens to see that you're a match. They can look at your tree. The one thing you want to keep in mind before you link a tree is you might want to consider how much of your tree you want to put online, because it's more effective if it's public. And so if you have, how you feel about it being public or private is a whole nother issue. But if you're going to link it to your results, which we kind of are in agreement that you should, you might want to think about just how much of your tree do you want public, some more, just to think about that. But it makes your analysis more effective.
Some people like to have just a DNA tree, like a skeleton tree just for your DNA. Like you don't have to publish all of the secrets and stuff of your family online, because hopefully Ancestry is not your main tree, that it is just your online, kind of like your business card and sharing, or your sharing what you have. So yeah, all the tests have the ability, and if they don't have the ability to link a tree, then you can always take the link, share the link from your Ancestry tree and put it in like your profile in MyHeritage, or that kind of thing. So that is step 3. So let's go ahead and move on to step 4, which is to research forward to living people. Okay, wait a minute. The dead people are hard enough to find. You want to now look at living people. How do you do that?
Well, one thing you want to remember is you were one of those living people who spit in the tube to get your test results. The other matches were living people who also, is it spit or spat? Whatever. Who also put their spit.
Or
I'll just change the tense. Who put their spit in a tube and sent it off. And so you're trying to connect to those people. And some of these things we've alluded to a little bit before with the obituaries and things of that type. One suggestion I would make with things you find in newspapers, to kind of go back to the half and step and other issues with newspapers and obituaries and marriage references and things like that, is to put all those items in chronological order, because that might help you see if there was a second husband or a third wife or whatever, and it may help you sift out the people that are step relatives and things like that, and help you analyze your results a little better, because maybe that match that you're trying to figure out how they're related to you, you find him or her in an obituary and you think he's got to connect through that family, but it turns out he's listed as a grandson, but he's not a biological grandson, and that's going to affect how you analyze your match to him.
Right.
And sometimes put those in chronology will help you see that a little bit.
Well, and in addition to the matches, the people who have already spat, there are potential spitters that you want to suss out by putting together, by getting to the living people, and think, oh, especially like if you're doing Y DNA where you're following the surname line, and you want to have people in 2 or 3 different branches tests to make sure there have not been any non-paternity events. So getting down to the living people, you may identify people that you're then going to reach out to and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you take a DNA test?
Especially if you have one to give them, right?
Exactly.
I want to, before we go any further, I want to address a question that was in the chat about how much of the tree to upload. It kind of varies, but as Shamele alluded to, kind of a skeleton tree, I don't always put all the notes and all the sources necessarily, but in terms of the relatives, I try to at least, well, when I started, I would go back to people born in 1900, but as I've gotten older and time has marched on, individuals who were born in the 20s or the 30s, I try to avoid living people, but you want to make it relatively easy for someone to see your tree and see if they connect to you. And you want to make it easy for you to connect from your tree down to them. And usually if you get to somebody born about that era, that's because we got to be thinking about the millennials and whatever who tested and what their grandparents and whatever would be, if that's as far back as they have their tree. You kind of want to go down. If you've got the cousins traced down that far, I would kind of use that as a rough.
So Susan says that she uploads the entire tree, including the siblings. Yes, for each generation. She says not necessary to include media or attachments, just the GEDCOM. So definitely, yep. Susan. Now you got a lot of shaking heads here. Lots of shaking heads.
Just the facts, ma'am.
All right. So who's Facebook? So I've done some stalking on Facebook. So tell me about this. When
this woman was actually stalking me. Not really. No, I have an author page, and so she had left me a message on Facebook, wanting to communicate where we have a distant Beidler relative in common. And what was very interesting is that she's from one of Conrad Beidler's daughters. So she lost the name immediately, but then it was a Beidler daughter who married a Spohn. So obviously it's then a paternal line for her the rest of the way. And these are not people that I've done any active research on. There's a house built by them in the early 1800s that I'd like to connect her with. So this is gonna spur some conversation and probably a DNA test to see if the DNA backs up the paper trail.
One thing when you're getting back about as far as Jim has gotten, you can be genealogically related to somebody from the same
without having the DNA,
without sharing any DNA, because you cannot have DNA from all umpteen bazillion of your grandparents. It just there's only so much room. You may think your body keeps growing, but there's only so much room in your genetic material for that. And since Jim mentioned Facebook, I had a lady on Tip of the Day message me, and she descends from the same Rampley guy that I do. Fifth great grandfathers, and the trees are both solid, but when we looked at our results and our matches, we're not a shared match for each other. But when you get back that far, that there's a reasonable chance of that. And there are charts online that will help you estimate that, how realistic that is and things of that nature. But that's going to happen. Now, if it's your first cousin, you should share DNA if you're really first cousins.
Yeah,
If you don't, there's something else going on.
That's a red warning light.
That's it. Yeah.
So that leads us into, you guys are so good. I couldn't do this. I mean, who could be better than you guys? So that leads us to the next step, which is to prepare yourself psychologically. So for you guys, did anything occur in your tree that you had to psychologically prepare for?
I mean, I didn't have any knowledge of anything. I did have one. My mother's mother was illegitimate, and so the jujitsu that I going through to prove to my satisfaction who her father was, my great grandfather. I wasn't as sure of that as I was of other connections. And when my first DNA test came back, wasn't showing any cousins in common, any matches. And so that had me biting my fingernails. Then a few started showing up, and I felt, okay, this is on solid ground.
I was lucky. There were no surprises in my, other than my ethnicity wasn't what I quite expected, but that goes back so far, it's not surprising. But there were no, when I saw I only have 3 first cousins, but when I looked at my second cousins or cousins of my first cousins of my parents, other than a few screen names that were kind of weird, I knew who every one of those individuals were, but the thing to remember is, even if you get your results and they come back and there's nothing, it's one thing to find out great grandma had a relationship you didn't know about. It's something else when it's much closer to you.
So speaking of something much closer, I'd like to bring on another guest who is going to talk to us about preparing psychologically. The guest is Bill Griffin. And Bill, welcome to the group.
Hi, guys. Shamele, thank you. Jim, Michael, I've been watching. It's fascinating, but I wonder what the heck I've gotten myself into here. I've done a couple of spit takes while watching. If you see what I did there?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm your guinea pig when you talk about the non-parental events out there.
So Bill is the author of The Stranger in My Genes. Bill is also, and Bill, you're going to do your dodge for me. Bill is also, hold on.
Oh, no, you there we go.
Also, the now anchor at large at CNBC, used to be full-time anchor, and has a few other books under his belt here. So Bill, talk to me about Stranger in My Genes. What does that mean? What happened?
I, like everybody else here, am an avid genealogist. My wife and I both are, and I have a first cousin. Now that I have to put that in quotes, I have a first cousin who's also an avid genealogist. And for years, he'd been bugging me to take a DNA test. His interest migrated to DNA testing. He wanted to find those living relatives that we didn't know about already. I'm still more interested in the dead relatives, so I could care less. Finally, in August of 2012, he convinced me to take a DNA test. A month later, to tell a very long story shortly, a month later, they got the results back, and this was his. I said, here, I took the test, you figure it out. A month later, the results come back, not what they expected. He didn't tell me what they were, but he said he's asked for a retest. A month after that, in October 4th, it was a Thursday, I remember it well. I got an email from my cousin saying that our Y DNA didn't match, which it should, since our fathers were brothers.
Okay.
And his conclusion immediately was that my father was not my father. This is how I found out, via email.
Wow. So you weren't like the person going out saying, hey, let me look at the, take a DNA test. It came to you, this.
It it just came out of nowhere, and literally in a blink of an eye, literally half of the family tree I had spent years building disappeared. You will not find on any of my DNA trees a single Griffith anywhere. I am not a Griffith, I found out.
So the book that you had written about the book 400 Years, was that the Griffith side?
Yes, it was. So I went to my friends at the New England Historic Genealogical Society, where there's a copy in the library, this book that I wrote about my family's religious heritage that I called By Faith Alone. Second edition just came out. But I went to them and I said, do me a favor, move the book from the nonfiction section of the library and put it in the fiction section, because I'm not actually related to any of these people.
Oh my goodness, Bill. So that's the kind of, book-ish part. What about the conversation? Like,
yes, what about the conversation? Luckily, this was in 2012 when I got the results back. My mother was still alive at the time. She was 95 years old. Wow. And they recount in The Stranger in My Genes, we had a very awkward conversation, very tension-filled conversation. But you have not lived, Shamele, until you've heard your 95-year-old mother confess to a fling. Now, my mother was a devout Christian. She read her Bible daily. She went to church on Sunday and was angry if her kids didn't go. She was a typical church lady. But the day she made her confession to me, she said, I made a mistake when I was younger. And I'm that mistake.
Never would you be a mistake, ever. Ever.
Well, yes, it was tough to hear at the time, but I'm over that now. It's been enough years that I've graduated to acceptance to all of it. Yes.
But guess what? You have a whole new family to research, right?
I do. Yes. It was an interesting search. My wife picked up the ball from there because I was still in the fetal position. But my wife, the saint, she did a tremendous amount, and she found out a great deal about my biological family that I had no idea about up to that point.
So having this experience, what tips would you provide to others to prepare psychologically? Because you're not alone in this happening. Like, so many people have a stranger in their genes. I mean, when we first started taking DNA tests about a decade ago, they said about 20 to 30% of African-American men were going to find that their Y chromosome traces back to Europe. And that is something psychologically that you need to prepare for. So what types of tips would you offer? This may disappoint you, but frankly, I don't know that there is a way you can prepare yourself. We would all be in denial that this could ever happen. I would be in denial if I read about somebody else who had this experience that I've gone through, and I would say to myself, well, there but for the grace of God, Yes.
You can never anticipate this kind of a result. The only thing I will say, and this is something I've said to genealogy clubs over the years, after my other book, By Faith Alone, came out, and I spoke to a number of groups, I said, when you begin the process of genealogical research, what you're doing is you're seeking the truth. Yes. And it had nothing to do with DNA testing. It was just doing good old-fashioned roll up your sleeves, go through the archives and the records, looking for those dead relatives, and you're looking for the truth. Be prepared to accept the truth, whatever it may be. I remember years ago attending a seminar in London, the Who Do You Think You Are convention. And one of the speakers said, one of the cardinal rules of genealogy is never marry an ancestor. Never attach yourself to that ancestor so much that you can't give them up, because the time may come someday when you get new information and you discover that you're not actually related to that person. And I thought, oh, how quaint is that? But you know what? It's absolutely true. There may come a day when you get new information, when new technology allows it to happen, whatever, cross-referencing on ancestry, and you will have to give up that answer. I had to give up half my tree.
And also, don't put your people on pedestals. Like they're people.
Yes.
Like, I mean, really, people want to hide them. They're shamed sometimes. Just
Yes.
don't put them on pedestals. So
You know who I put on a pedestal was my mother. And that was, I went through all those stages of grief that have been identified. And the biggest thing I had to reconcile was that I had placed my mother on this pedestal. I mean, I guess we all do, right? To some degree. But it didn't allow me to see my mother as a human being. And she was human like all of us. And once I got past that, I was able to accept the results. And I'll give something away. I mean, I'm working on a sequel to The Stranger in My Genes, but I have reached out to my biological family and I have been welcomed. And we have a good relationship. So it has been a good step in this odd journey that I never anticipated that I would go on, but it has been a fulfilling part of that journey. That's for sure.
That's amazing. So it's great that you're anchor at large because now you have time to write.
Yes, ma'am, I do. Exactly. Thank goodness for that.
So I'm going to bring the guys back because we've gone through the quick start for preparing. So everyone out there, and we have so many people out there, I definitely want to first share, just finalize this. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. This is the quick start for preparing. So to prepare, you want to first determine your research goal. Then you want to check your tree for accuracy. You know, those obituaries, those notices, some people might be step. Then you want to link your tree because that is the quickest way to be able to deter for your cousin to see how you're related. Step 4 would then be to research forward to living people. And step 5 is while you're waiting for that test, realize that your DNA could tell you something that you're not psychologically prepared for. And Bill said there's no way to prepare, and I believe you, Bill. There's absolutely no way to prepare for that. You kind of just are. Oops, hold on. Where are you guys? Oh, here we go. So I lost you guys.
Here we are.
We're here.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being on this episode, for preparing for the DNA test results. And now we're going to hop on to our second half of our show, which is to help you to find great-grandmom using your DNA. So guys, I will check you later. Don't leave me if you can. So hi, everyone. We are now going to move to the second half of our show, which is finding great-grandparents with DNA. So I don't know how many of you guys have holes in your tree. I have this big hole in my tree where I don't have a great-grandparent. So I was very, very lucky to meet and have come on the show Diahan Southard, who is your DNA guide. Hi, Diahan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so thankful to have you here. We have this big mystery in one side of my family where we don't know my grandfather's father. And so I'm really excited to have you on today to help us with finding a great-grandparent.
Let's do it.
So let's do that. So let's go ahead with step 1. Were you able to share your screen?
Oh, was I sharing my screen? I can
share my screen. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just check it.
Okay.
So let's go on. So step 1 is step 1 that we always have for everything in genealogy, right?
That's
Which
right.
is to
start with your knowns. Yeah.
So first define your goal.
Oh, right. Yeah, define your goal. Right.
Right? You have these beautiful slides that I need to let everybody see. Oh my gosh. Determine what your goal is going to be, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of talked before about the different goals that you might have. And then let's move on to step 2, which is to review your known matches. So I love this. So it's counterintuitive to me. I just automatically said, I know who all these people are. Let me not look at them. So talk to me about reviewing your known matches.
Well, I think everybody does the same thing that you do. I mean, we're looking in our genealogy to solve unknown questions, right? And so we want to hop in and get to the unknown people. We kind of skip over all the known people, but it's really the known cousins that give us the most direct path to answering our questions. So like, for example, if you know who your first cousin is, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, well, I know that person, so I'm just going to skip over them. But in reality, your first cousin can help you find the DNA matches that you need to answer your question about your great-grandparents, for example.
So those first cousins, yes. So,
so yeah, this slide here is just reminding us that in order to have a realizable goal with DNA, we need the goal to be within 6 generations.
Okay.
So if you're like today, we're talking about finding a great grandparent, which is well within range of DNA. But some people want to push it back a little bit farther. And theoretically, you should be able to do research and find information about a 6th great or on that 6 generations. That would be your 5 times great grandparent. But why is that? So if you go to the next slide, you'll see like, why is it that we are limited by that range? And really the answer is that we're limited by that because of the amount of DNA that we're going to have from our ancestors that far back. So one of the things I like to remind people is to think about what kind of cousin can help you answer your question. So if you're looking for a great grandparent, then your missing ancestor is going to be making second cousins for you, right? Because great grandparents, they make second cousins for us. So if you're missing that great grandparent couple, you could have some second cousins out there that are related to this couple you're looking for. Or if you're looking for a 2 times great grandparent, then you're going to have third cousins that may be descended from that couple that could help you. So it's good to just think about, okay, what kinds of cousins would I need? And so if you're getting way back there, then you're going to be dealing with like 5th cousins and 6th cousins, and that's just really back.
Someone said that's poison, but I won't say who said that. Someone calls them poison.
Well, they're almost always rabbit holes, those distant cousins, and it's just so difficult to work with them because you just can't be confident that you even share a recent common ancestor, because just because you share DNA doesn't mean that you share a recent common ancestor. There's lots of reasons that people share DNA. So it's just really, really complicated when we're dealing that far back. So it's just a lot easier if you just focus on that great grandparent 2 times, even 3 times great, but going beyond that, just it's not a very good DNA goal.
So great grandparent is right within where we need to be.
It's a sweet spot, Shamele. You found the sweet spot. Yeah.
All right. So are there any more slides for this particular step?
I don't think so. You know, okay. I made them like 3 days ago.
All right. Now we're going to, so you said review your known matches. So I'm going to just show slides for your known matches so everyone can see those because they're so beautiful. Someone concurred in the comments. Diane, beautiful slides.
It's my hobby.
And so know who your known matches are. Go ahead.
Okay, so you use your known matches to break up your whole match list into these separate groups. So like I was saying, if you have a first cousin, really a first cousin can help you divide your match list into 2 groups. People that are related to your maternal grandparents and people that aren't. So they're related to your paternal grandparents. So a first cousin can divide your match list into 2 groups. And then a second cousin could then identify one of your great grandparent couples. So if you have 4 great grandparent couples, then that second cousin can help you identify one of those 4. So I think if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that. Yeah. So if you're talking about great grandparents, you should be able to divide your entire match list into 4 groups. It should represent one of each of these 4 couples. So you just need to start thinking about your match list in this way. Now, of course, this is only for people whose relatives aren't related to each other. If you have some, you know, endogamy or multiple relationships, this won't necessarily work. But for a lot of people, this does work really well. So if you just scroll through the next couple slides, you'll see if we just move back a generation, then we're going to go into 8 groups and then 16 groups. So if you just start thinking about your match list this way, it really helps you understand the groups, right? So again, known cousin help us gather relatives who are related on the same line. So if you're, say, a first cousin, you have this first cousin, you use something we call the shared matches tool. All of our companies have one, and it just allows you to gather matches that are similar to each other. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the first cousin, all the matches that you share with your first cousin are going to represent that whole line, right? That whole line. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that if you have a second cousin, then you're just going to represent that section of your pedigree. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see it. We have a third cousin. Well, that's going to occupy just that next section of your pedigree. So you see, as you move forward with your cousins, first, second, third, whatever, you're ciphering off smaller and smaller parts of your tree. Those people are going to share DNA with those cousins.
Amazing, amazing. So let's see. All right, step 3 is to eliminate no more squirrels, you say?
No more squirrels. So many of us have this problem, right? We have a research goal and we start looking at our DNA match list, and then we see a DNA match, like, wait a second, who's that? I want to figure out who that is. And then you start off on this other path. Don't do it. You've got to stay focused. Okay, stay focused.
Wait, can you say that again?
Just stay focused. Don't go off on some random search after some random DNA match that you don't recognize. You use the system, the shared matches, like whittling down your group so you have this core group of matches you're working with. Those are the only people you're allowed to look at. That's it.
That's it. Thank
That's
you.
Yeah.
Focus.
Okay. Okay, so you start. Basically, a lot of people, what the best methodology is, in my book, I call this the leftovers strategy. So it's basically you try to mark all of your known DNA matches according to your known.
They don't know Jesus? Is that why they're left over? No, just.
So it's like you mark all the matches that you know are related to you on a line, you know, and then the people who are left over should be related to that missing branch. So like in your case, Shamele, is your missing ancestor on your mom's side or your dad's side?
On my mom's side.
Okay, so we would take like a first cousin on your dad's side, like we have here on this slide, and we would mark just all of those cousins paternal. Everybody who shares DNA with you and that first cousin, we know all of those people are related on your dad's side. So we can just mark them all paternal, and then we don't look at them anymore because we're focused, right?
Hit the road, out of here.
Right. Okay, so next slide. So then if this is that star right there represents the ancestor that I've decided we want to find. So then we would want a second cousin that is related on this maternal, the direct maternal line, right? Because that's not the line we want to research. So we find a second cousin who's related on that section of our pedigree. We mark all of those matches to be like, we don't care about those. We're not looking at those matches, right?
Okay.
And then if you had it, you could even go one more.
Okay.
And you would see that there's a third cousin. So go, one more slide. If you have a third cousin who represents that other section of the pedigree that we're not interested in, then we can mark all of those matches. So after you go through this process and you mark all of these known matches, even if you don't actually know them, like you don't know exactly how they're related to you, you just know they're sharing DNA with one of your known cousins. And so then you can just mark them off. And then theoretically, whoever's left over should be the matches, the ones that hold your answer.
That is amazing. I can't wait to get off. How about we have 10 more minutes left? I cannot wait to try this. I'm going to do this. And I love the little African-American couple. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So wait a minute.
So this is the leftovers then. That's that's the part that you'll be looking at. And what you're doing with those leftovers, and someone asked, Magda asked, is the leftover strategy described in your DNA guide? So yeah, it's in my book, in your DNA guide, the book. So you can see it, I guess, written there in detail. But essentially these
they go to yourdnaguide.com.
Yeah, yourdnaguide.com, and that you can get my book there on my website. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the purpose then of these leftovers. What you're trying to do with this group of matches is you're trying to determine how is this group of matches related to each other. So you've basically genetically determined that this group of people, they don't fit anywhere else in your tree. You can't, they don't match with anyone else that you know, which means they should represent your unknown line. So then your goal is to look at the genealogy of these matches and figure out who is their common ancestor. Because you can't look for your common ancestor because you don't know who you're looking for, right? You don't know what their name is, right? Otherwise you would be stuck, okay? So you have to look at them and ask, who's their common ancestor? What's their common location? What's their common surname? Where are they connecting to each other? And then if you can identify that, you can see how they're overlapping with each other, then you found it. You found your family, right? And it's this like amazing magic. Yes, happy dance moment for sure. It's like, it is really a magical minute when you see that first 2 DNA matches where you see their common ancestor with each other. And it's amazing, because then you're like, okay, I know I have to be related to this family. And then of course the last step, always and forever, is to do genealogy, right? You have to then do the genealogy to figure out how you're connected to this family. So Howard's asking, how do you treat first cousin once removed, the same as the first cousin or as a second cousin? So Howard, there are 2 kinds of first cousins once removed. So you have a first cousin once removed. So think of your first cousin. Your first cousin's child is your first cousin once removed, right? But your common ancestor with that person, your MRCA, we call it, your most recent common ancestor, is still your grandparents, right? And so that person will still act as a filter for your grandparents, meaning it'll give you matches that are related to your grandparents and everybody before them. Okay, that's the first kind of first cousin once removed. That's somebody who's younger than you. Okay, the second kind of first cousin once removed is someone who's older than you. So now think about your dad, your dad's first cousin. You are your dad's first cousin once removed, right? Okay, so I know it's a little, but if you think about that, yeah, a little hard on the brain. But if you think about that, and then you ask yourself, well, who's your MRCA with that person? So think about it. Your dad's first cousin, who is your MRCA with that person? So it's not your grandparents now, but it's your great grandparents, because it's your dad's grandparents, which are your great grandparents. So that cousin, if you use the shared matches tool on that cousin's going to represent just that great grandparent couple, not your full grandparents, because that's not your MRCA. So you just have to think about who's your MRCA with the DNA match, and that's the couple that DNA match is going to help you filter, is going to help you gather matches that are related to that couple.
Pretty cool, pretty cool. So there's another question, but she left out a person. Can you understand what that question is?
All right, Rosemary, my dad's brother married my grandmother's sister on my mom's side. She was my mom's aunt, and I'd have to draw a picture of this, Rosemary. I'm very visual. So what you have to think about, it sounds like what you're talking about is a situation of multiple relationships. Okay, whenever 2 people have multiple relationships, it's fine. You just have to account for both relationships in the DNA. So what you'd want to do is you'd ask yourself, what are the 2 relationships that I have with my cousin? So maybe your first cousins and your second cousins, or something like that, right? And then you'd ask yourself, okay, how much DNA do first cousins share? And how much DNA do second cousins share? And are we sharing that same amount of DNA? And that's how you would just kind of verify that everything's good. You get in trouble when you start thinking about shared matches, because you're going to share DNA with everybody that you guys are all connected to. So it's a little bit trickier to piece out all of those relationships. But as long as you know about them, it's really fine. Like, because you'll understand, okay, I'm going to share DNA with everybody on this side, and that's going to complicate things a little bit, but that's okay. So it's just when you don't know about the multiple relationships that gets you in trouble.
So Christine's asking, would this work for an orphaned ancestor?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. The leftover strategy is exactly what you need for this orphaned ancestor, especially if the rest of your family tree is pretty solid. Like if you know all of your other, say, 2 times great grandparents, this is the only one that's missing, the leftover strategy is perfect.
So that is so Diane, you're like you're so deep on this stuff. Like, how did you have any one that you aspire, like that you looked up to? Because like there's so many people in the genealogy game, and you're like at the top. Like, who did you aspire to, early on?
Well, it's tricky because like I grew up with the industry, right? We were all even. There was nobody to strive for, really, because we were all inventing it together, like at the same time.
Oh, I know that.
So I mean, but nowadays, my buddies or my models. I mean, I love Blaine. He's awesome. He's such a good friend. Are you here? You.
Hello.
Blaine, thank you so much for being here. This is, I can't get it right. This is Blaine. Oh my gosh, I can't get it right. You made me nervous, Blaine. Blaine Bettinger is here, who so many of us are so thankful, Blaine, for the work that you do for genealogy. And Diane, I was like, oh my God, if she doesn't say Blaine, I'm going to just have
to. That would be embarrassing, right?
Well, I think Diane is absolutely amazing and unparalleled in the community. So I'm honored to be her friend.
I'm going to bring the other guys on, bring our other guests back. We're going to have a full screen.
We're supposed to ask the book, which book she likes. So
no, that's not fair. No, I'm not saying anything.
Yeah. Totally not fair.
Shamele, I thought we were going to end up seeing a picture of your great-grandfather. We have to wait for that now?
Yeah, you have to wait. You have to, just like we have to wait for that book.
Yeah, first time I saw an interview with you, Bill, you kept the O. Henry ending away from, so
And thus it shall ever be, Jim.
So we have so many people from so many places. I just wanted to make sure that we do not go off without saying hi to them. We have, I think I ended off with, I ended a long time ago. Look at all these people. So my friend Diane, we have Rebecca is here from PA. We have Pam from Washington State.
Pam, I'm in Washington State. That's why I'm in the car.
Dean Henry is in Berwyn. Let's see, so many people. Let's see, Nadine is here from Chicago. We have Regina, it's probably Regina Vaughn from Philadelphia, AAGG. We have from Connecticut, Jenny Horner. We also have Linda from Sunny City Center, Florida. I like the first part of the name. I would definitely like Sun City. Ottawa, Canada. Hello, Howard from Ottawa. New Hampshire. June's here from New Hampshire. We have Debbie from Eustis, Florida. Lincoln, Nebraska is Jenny. Lake Erie, Pennsylvania. I don't know who that is. And Anonia is from Munich, Germany. Hello. It must be late there. From Oregon State, we have another on your coast, Joanne, great wine in Oregon. We have Illinois. Beidler would know about that wine. Lori from Illinois. Julie, PA. We have some Jersey folks. Go Jersey, West Deptford. Hi, Paula. How are you? It's so nice to see your name. I miss seeing your face. Bertha from Washington, D.C. Someone loves closed captions. So that looks like all of the people from all over were here to see you guys. I have one question. that I want to ask. The question is, where do you see DNA in 5 to 10 years? And this is not a luncheon speech. This is quick. Functionality or types of things that you expect to see.
Very quickly, I predict with some great confidence that we will all be forced to take DNA tests someday for insurance purposes. I think that health insurance companies will require DNA tests to know what our predilections are for certain diseases so that they can set up premiums for our insurance. So I think that's coming. Not sure when, but I think it'll be part of our future someday.
Who's next?
I'll go. I think artifact testing is a big part of the next 5 years. Getting DNA from our ancestors' items, I think is going to be huge.
Wow.
Well, I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but what I hope happens is more DNA testing in Germany and Switzerland so that maybe I can break through the Beidler line all the way back to the Swiss ancestry that I suspect.
That's what I was going to say too, Jim. Actually, just larger databases and more worldwide databases. I mean, I think that we're just growing and growing and growing, and it's just going to make it easier and easier and easier for us to find our ancestors.
Indeed.
I think I'm hoping there's tools that will allow us to refine how we analyze our matches and determine the relationships a little easier than we have right now. Because there's still quite a bit of guesswork, at least initially when we're looking through these things. So that's what I'm looking for, hopefully.
Well, except if you're Blaine or Diane, but
Well, there's a ton of guesswork still.
I'm just hoping for something simple, like the better ease of. I know that there's the ability to have DNA in our lineage software and stuff, but I just want to see it like a lot more integrated, and eventually we'll have more historical DNA data. And so I'd like to see how that kind of manifests itself. So everyone, Pam says artifact testing, can't wait for that. I guess I better start grabbing stuff from my relatives so I'll be able to test it. Everyone, thank you so much. It has been a joy to have you here as a testament to all of the comments and feedback. Thank you. Have a fantastic day. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Yes, please hold on.
Thank you, Shamele.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.